Okay, today's plan is trig functions and quadrants. We're going to figure out how to find what the sine or cosine of an angle is, or honestly, even tangent. Okay, well, I don't think we'll do any examples of that today. Okay, so hopefully all of you remember your table. I'm going to pause this video while I do it, but you guys, I hope, can do it yourselves. So pause the video while I table, okay? Okay, so remember with the pi over 4, the square root 2 over 2, that also equals 1 over square root 2, over, or 1 over square root 2. It's saying the same thing. So let me ask you a question. But first, let me fill this out. So all students take calculus. I do enjoy that saying. So let me ask you this. If I told you to figure out what sine 3 pi over 4 equals, what would you tell me? Well, first off, we know we have to use this, right? We have to use this column. We also need to know, well, what is our trig function? Our trig function is sine. So we know that this is part of our answer. Well, what's the other part? Well, we need to know, is it positive or is it negative? That's where 3/4 come in, or to be technical, the 3 comes in. So remember in the last video, we knew that pi over 4 is in our first quadrant, right? What is in our second quadrant? Not 2 pi over 4, right? Because that simplifies. And remember that saying? If it simplifies, it isn't it. So 3 pi over 4. Oh, hey, look! It's in the second quadrant. So that means this is positive, right? Okay, so let's try another one. I don't know, let's try sine 10 pi over 3. Okay, so what does that equal? Well, we know we got to use the column with pi over 3 in it. So we got to use this column. What's our trig function? Sine. So we know it's going to be square root 3 over 2. But that's only part of our answer, right? Well, is it negative or is it positive? Which quadrant is it in? Remember, this first quadrant, right? Second quadrant is 2 pi over 3. It's our third quadrant. Now 3 pi over 3, because that simplifies. So 4 pi over 3. 5 pi over 3. And so on and so forth. 7 pi over 3. It's our fourth quadrant, right? Well, now it's going to start over. We're back at our first quadrant. Then we have 8 pi over 3. It's our second quadrant. Again, not 9 pi over 3, right? 9 pi over 3 simplifies. So 10 pi over 3, which is our third quadrant. So what does that tell us? Then tangent, where tangent is positive. So that means cosine is negative. Let's try something different. Let's try something with cosine. Let's do, I don't know, cosine 5 pi over 6. Well, what does that equal? Well, we know we got to use pi over 6 column, right? And what's our trig function? It's cosine. So it's square root 3 over 2, right? Well, now we need to know, is it positive or is it negative? So our first one is pi over 6. That's in our first quadrant, right? Second quadrant, not 2 pi over 6, simplifies. 3 pi over 6, simplifies. 4 pi over 6, simplifies. 5 pi over 6. So it's in our second quadrant, right? This is in our second quadrant. That makes cosine negative. Okay? So does that make sense? Well, now we're going to go backwards. Oops, we are actually going to go backwards. We want to find if sine theta equals 1 over square root 2, what does that mean? Well, let's go back to our table. What is 1 square root 2? This, right? Now, what's our trig function? It's sine. So theta equals pi over 4, right? Well, if theta equals pi over 4, then we know that cosine is pi over 4 and tan is pi over 4, right? Okay, but a word of caution. Sine theta isn't only positive in the first quadrant, right? Where else is it positive? If you go back to your graph, it's positive in the second quadrant too, right? So then we also have to find out what cosine of 3 pi over 4 is, and the tan of 3 pi over 4. Okay? Okay, so if we're doing cosine pi over 4, what does that equal? Go back to your table. I'm not going to keep doing that. So cosine of pi over 4, that gives us square root 2 over 2. And we know it's positive, right? Because it's in our first quadrant. In our first quadrant, all of our trig functions are positive. Now, what about tan pi over 4? It's 1, right? This is still going to be the same numbers, right? Still the same. But now we have to ask ourselves, well, is it negative or is it positive? Look at your graph. Is cosine 3 pi over 4 positive or negative in the second quadrant? Sorry about that. Announcements keep coming on now, don't they? Well, cosine, where was I? Cosine is not positive in our second quadrant, right? So that means this is negative. What about tan? It's not positive in our second quadrant, so it's negative, right? Okay, so let's do one more example. So if cosine theta equaled, let's say, square root 3 over 2. I want you to find sine theta and tan theta. Okay, what's our first step? Well, what's square root 3 over 2? What is the radians of that? What does theta equal? That's right, pi over 6. If you look at your table, I'll show you. Okay. So we have sine pi over 6, tan pi over 6. But cosine is not just positive in the first quadrant, right? It's positive in, go back, the fourth quadrant. So we need to find the sine and tan of 11 pi over 6. Oops, sorry. Okay, so what do we know? Well, according to our table, what's pi over 6? Square root 3, not square root 3, I'm sorry. I'm thinking of cosine still. It's 1/2, right? 1/2 over here too. What about tan? It's 1 over square root 3. It's going to be same for both. Now, we got to determine, well, is it positive or negative in our fourth quadrant? Not first, fourth. It's negative, right? In our first quadrant, they're all going to be positive. They're all going to be negative. Now, I will warn you that sometimes you might be given a negative. Then you got to figure out, okay, which quadrants is cosine negative in? And then you do that. And you figure out, okay, well, it's negative in the second and third quadrant. So instead of doing pi over 6, you got to do, I said second, 5 pi over 6, 5 pi over 6. And your third one, which is 7 pi over 6. So this is 7. And then you find out, well, is it negative or positive for sine, is it negative or positive for tan, and all that. Same basic steps, just a little more challenging. Okay? So I'll see you guys tomorrow. Hope you enjoyed the video. Have a nice night.